The story begins in the southern region of Portugal, an area known for its dramatic cliffs and golden sands. The location is Praia da Luz, a small resort town that translates to the Beach of Light. However, in May of the year 2007, this location would become the center of a global shadow. The focal point of this narrative is the Ocean Club, a holiday complex often frequented by tourists from the United Kingdom. Specifically, the investigation centers on apartment 5A, a ground-floor unit situated at the corner of the block. Your support brings light to the shadows, where the truth has been hidden. Please like and subscribe to ensure these silent files are never closed. Stay with us, because the forensic evidence we are about to uncover reveals a reality far more complex than you might imagine. From a security perspective, the apartment was vulnerable. It was accessible not only from the front door, but also via patio doors at the rear, which led to a public swimming pool and a street that anyone could traverse. Inside this unit resided a family of 5. 2 parents, both physicians, and their 3 young subjects. Among them was the central subject of this case, a young female individual with blonde hair and a distinctive mark on her right eye. The atmosphere in the days leading up to the incident was described as relaxed. The family was vacationing with a group of friends, a collective that would later be referred to by the media as the Tapa 7. Their routine was consistent. During the day, the young subjects participated in activities organized by the resort. In the evenings, the adults would dine at the Tapas Bar, a restaurant located within the complex but physically separated from the apartments. On the evening of May the 3rd, the weather was cool. The parents followed their established night schedule. They placed the 3 young individuals to rest in the bedroom facing the back of the apartment. The room was darkened, the shutters were lowered, and the window was closed. At approximately 8:30 in the evening, the parents left the apartment to join their friends for dinner. The distance between the dining area and the apartment was roughly 50 yards, a distance that, in hindsight, would become the subject of intense scrutiny. The arrangement was simple. The adults did not use an audio monitoring service. Instead, they implemented a roving check system. Every 15 to 20 minutes, one member of the group would leave the table, walk back to the apartments, and ensure the safety of the sleeping subjects. For the first hour, the evening proceeded without alarm. The laughter from the Tapas Bar drifted through the air, masking the silence that was settling over apartment 5A. At roughly 9 o'clock, the father of the missing subject returned to the unit for his designated check. He entered the apartment using his key. He observed the bedroom door was slightly ajar, just as they had left it. He peered inside, listening for the rhythm of breathing. He saw the forms of the 3 young subjects asleep. Satisfied that the secure location was compromised, he returned to the restaurant. However, the timeline of the vanishing was already ticking. Somewhere in the darkness, between the chaotic layout of the resort and the quiet streets of Praia da Luz, a sequence of events was unfolding that would result in one of the most perplexing mysteries in modern history. The tragedy was not a singular event, but a convergence of timing, opportunity, and a lapse in security that would haunt the world for decades. To understand the mechanics of this disappearance, one must analyze the critical window of time between 9 o'clock and 10 o'clock in the evening. This 60-minute period contains the answer to what happened to the young subject, yet it remains fragmented by conflicting witness statements and forensic anomalies. After the father returned to dinner, the night schedule continued. At approximately 9:30, another member of the group, a friend named Matthew, volunteered to check on the apartments. He went to apartment 5A. He later reported that the bedroom door was still open, but perhaps wider than before. He did not enter the room fully. He paused, listening for any sound of distress. He heard nothing. Assuming the silence equated to safety, he did not visually confirm the presence of the young daughter. He returned to the group, unaware that the situation inside might have already changed. The pivotal moment arrived at 10 o'clock. It was the mother's turn to conduct the check. She left the table and walked the short distance to the ground floor unit. Upon entering through the patio doors, she noticed an immediate anomaly. The door to the subject's sleeping quarters, which the father recalled leaving slightly ajar, was now wide open. A draft was circulating through the room. As she stepped further into the bedroom, the reality of the scene became clear. The window was open. The external shutter, which had been lowered and secured earlier that evening, was now raised completely. The curtains blew in the wind. The mother looked toward the beds. The two younger siblings were still asleep in their cots, but the bed of the eldest subject was empty. The soft toy she slept with was lying on the pillow, but the subject was gone. Panic was instantaneous. The mother ran back to the tapas bar, her voice breaking the leisure of the evening. Witnesses recall her screaming a phrase that would be repeated in police files for years. "They have taken her." This declaration that the subject had been taken, rather than simply wandered off, set the initial tone for the investigation. The resort staff and the group of friends immediately began a frantic search of the perimeter. They called out the name of the missing individual, checking the swimming pool area, the tennis courts, and the dark roads leading away from the Ocean Club. The timeline suggests a very narrow opportunity for any intruder. If the father's check at 9 o'clock was accurate, and the mother's discovery at 10 o'clock was the endpoint, the incident occurred within that single hour. However, if the friend who checked at 9:30 failed to notice the absence because he did not look at the bed, the window of opportunity shrinks or shifts dramatically. Forensic experts would later debate the physical evidence of the open window. Was it a point of entry or an exit strategy? Or was it staged to look like one? The absence of forced entry marks on the shutters complicated the theory of a stranger breaking in. Yet, the open window remained the primary physical sign that the secure location had been breached from the outside. By the time the local Portuguese police arrived, the crime scene had been compromised. Multiple individuals had entered the apartment, touching surfaces and disrupting the environment in their desperate search for the young individual. The golden rule of preserving the forensic integrity of a location of interest had been broken in the chaos of the tragedy. The vanishing was complete, and the long, dark road of the investigation had just begun. As the initial search for the missing individual expanded from the immediate vicinity of the apartment to the surrounding streets, investigators began to piece together a fragmented timeline. Critical to this reconstruction was the testimony of a specific witness, one of the dining companions who had been at the restaurant with the parents that evening. This account would introduce the possibility that the disappearance was not a result of wandering off, but a calculated act of removal. The witness stated that at approximately 9:15 in the evening, during her own rotation to check on her family members, she observed a male figure walking away from the apartment complex. This sighting occurred roughly 45 minutes before the alarm was raised. The location of the sighting was a quiet road running adjacent to the resort, an area shadowed by trees and streetlights that offered poor visibility. According to the statement provided to the authorities, the man was walking with a sense of purpose, but not urgency. What drew the attention of the witness was not the man himself, but what he was carrying. He held a large object in his arms, positioned against his chest. In the dim light, the witness described this object as a bundle or a sleeping individual dressed in light-colored sleepwear. Crucially, the witness noted the position of the individual being carried. The legs were hanging down, and the observer could discern bare feet. This detail would later become a focal point of the forensic analysis, as the missing daughter was known to be barefoot when placed in her bed for the night schedule. The description of the sleeping wear also matched the items the missing person was wearing at the time of the disappearance. However, in the immediate aftermath of the incident, this testimony was treated with a degree of skepticism by the local police. The authorities initially operated under the theory that the young individual had woken up, wandered out of the unsecured apartment in search of the parents, and subsequently became lost or fell into a hazardous area. The idea of a stranger entering the apartment and removing the daughter without leaving forensic traces or causing a disturbance seemed improbable to the initial responders. This dismissal allowed valuable time to pass. While the search focused on the ground level, looking under vehicles, in shrubbery, and near the coastline, the potential lead regarding a man carrying a small-sized figure away from the scene was not immediately prioritized. It was only later, when the physical search yielded no results, that the investigation pivoted back to this sighting. By then, the shadow in the night had vanished, and the opportunity to intercept the figure had been lost. The question remained: was this a glimpse of the person responsible for the taking, or was it an unrelated tourist carrying their own sleeping family member home? In the absence of a clear perpetrator, and with the pressure from the international media mounting, the investigation required a focus. Approximately nearly 2 weeks after the incident, the attention of the authorities and the press coalesced around a specific local resident. This individual was a British expatriate living in a villa just a short distance from the location of the incident. This resident initially involved himself in the case as a volunteer. Being fluent in both English and Portuguese, he offered his services as a translator for the police and the media, bridging the communication gap between the local authorities and the foreign journalists. His presence at the scene was constant, and his knowledge of the investigation seemed extensive. To some observers, his eagerness to assist appeared to be genuine altruism. To others, it appeared to be an attempt to insert himself into the narrative. The suspicion began to grow when journalists noted his proximity to the apartment and his behavior, which some described as odd or overly intense. The theory suggested that his helpfulness was a facade designed to monitor the progress of the inquiry. Police eventually declared him an arguido, or a formal suspect, although no charges were brought against him at that time. The media frenzy that followed was intense. Reporters camped outside his villa, analyzing his every movement. His garden was excavated, and his vehicles were searched by forensic teams looking for any biological traces or fibers that could link him to the missing daughter. The investigation into this individual was exhaustive. They examined his digital footprint, his communication history, and his movements on the night of the disappearance. However, despite the heavy scrutiny and the aggressive pursuit by the tabloid press, no physical evidence was ever found to connect him to the crime. There was no DNA, no fingerprints, and no witness who could definitively place him inside the apartment. Months later, the status of arguido was lifted, and he was cleared of any involvement. The focus on this expatriate served as a cautionary tale about the dangers of tunnel vision in a complex investigation. While the world watched the siege of his home, the true timeline and the actual perpetrator remained hidden in the noise. The investigation had consumed valuable resources, chasing a lead that ultimately turned out to be a dead end, leaving the central mystery of the missing individual unresolved. By September of 2007, 4 months had passed since the initial report of the disappearance. The atmosphere surrounding the case had shifted dramatically. The sympathy that had initially flowed toward the family began to evaporate, replaced by a colder, more cynical narrative driven by the lack of progress. The Portuguese authorities, facing immense international pressure to resolve the mystery, began to pivot their focus away from the theory of an external intruder. The investigation entered a new, controversial phase. The working theory held by the local detectives evolved. They began to explore the hypothesis that no abduction had taken place. Instead, the inquiry considered the possibility that a tragic accident had occurred within the apartment, resulting in the loss of the subject's life, and that the scene had subsequently been altered to simulate a disappearance. This theory suggested that the panic of the situation led to a complex cover-up rather than a predatory act. This shift culminated in a procedural designation that shocked the public observers. The parents were summoned to the police headquarters for intense questioning. Following these interrogations, they were formally declared arguidos. This legal status in the Portuguese system is often translated as suspects or persons of interest, granting the individuals certain legal protections, but also marking them as targets of the investigation. The media narrative turned hostile. Tabloid headlines began to scrutinize the behavior of the parents, analyzing their facial expressions and lack of public tears as signs of guilt rather than trauma. Leaks from the investigation suggested that the police believed the parents were involved in concealing the truth. The interrogation reportedly involved an offer. If the mother admitted to an accidental death in the apartment, the legal consequences would be lenient. She refused to sign any confession, maintaining that her daughter had been taken by a stranger. The burden of this accusation was immense. The family, who had been campaigning for the return of their missing member, now found themselves defending their own innocence against a system that seemed determined to close the case by implicating them. The breaking news banners no longer asked, "Where is she?" but rather, "Did they do it?" This period marked the darkest hour for the parents, as they were isolated by suspicion, while the true answer to the mystery remained elusive. The pivot toward the parents was largely driven by the deployment of specialized forensic tools. In an effort to break the deadlock, the investigation team brought in highly trained canines from the United Kingdom. These were not ordinary tracking dogs. They were enhanced victim recovery dogs, specifically trained to detect the scent of biological decay in human blood, even in microscopic quantities. The dogs were introduced to the apartment and the surrounding environment. In video footage that would later be analyzed by millions online, the canines appeared to alert in specific areas. One dog, trained to detect the scent of a lifeless form, barked near a wardrobe in the parents' bedroom and behind a sofa in the living area. The other dog, trained to detect blood, showed interest in the same zones. Crucially, the dogs also inspected the vehicle the family had rented weeks after the disappearance. The animals gave an alert near the trunk of the car. For the investigators, these alerts were the smoking gun. They hypothesized that the daughter had lost her life in the apartment, and her remains had been moved using the vehicle at a later date. This evidence formed the backbone of the decision to name the parents as suspects. However, forensic science is rarely as black and white as a canine alert. Physical samples were collected from the areas where the dogs had reacted: scrapings from the floor, fibers from the carpet, and swabs from the car. These samples were sent to a forensic science laboratory in the United Kingdom for DNA analysis. The results were complex and ultimately inconclusive. While some markers in the DNA profile were consistent with the missing individual, the samples were degraded and mixed. The genetic material contained components from multiple people, which is common in a rental car or a holiday apartment used by many individuals. The scientists could not say with 100% certainty that the biological material belonged to the missing subject. This created a conflict between the behavioral evidence of the dogs and the hard science of the laboratory. A canine alert, without corroborating physical DNA evidence, is not proof of a crime in a court of law. It is merely intelligence. The defense argued that the alerts could be caused by transfer scents moved on clothing or toys, or simply false positives. The blood could have been from a minor injury, a nosebleed, or entirely unrelated to the incident. Ultimately, the forensic anomalies could not sustain a murder charge. The evidence was too ambiguous to prove that a crime had been committed by the parents or that the daughter had ever been in the trunk of that car. The reliance on the dogs had provided a compelling theory, but it failed to provide the definitive proof needed to solve the puzzle. The investigation had hit a scientific wall, leaving the parents under a cloud of suspicion, but legally free. By the autumn of 2007, the investigation in Praia da Luz had reached a point of exhaustion. The intense scrutiny placed upon the parents, combined with the lack of definitive forensic evidence linking them to the crime, created a legal and logistical stalemate. In September of that year, the family made the difficult decision to leave the country where the incident occurred and return to the United Kingdom. The departure was a significant media event. Cameras documented the family boarding the aircraft, capturing the visual reality of their situation. They had arrived as a family of 5, but they were departing as a group of 4. The subject of the search was left behind, her location still unknown. This physical separation marked the end of the immediate, on-the-ground search by the parents and the beginning of a long, remote campaign for answers. Upon their return to their home in Rothley, the parents were still designated as arguidos, or formal suspects, by the Portuguese authorities. This legal cloud hung over them for nearly a year, restricting their ability to speak freely about certain aspects of the case and maintaining a barrier of suspicion between them and the public. However, the Portuguese police were facing their own internal crisis. The theories regarding the parents and the initial suspect, the British expatriate, had failed to yield a prosecutable case. There was no confession, no weapon, and crucially, no body. In July of 2008, the Portuguese Attorney General made a decisive announcement that altered the trajectory of the case. The authorities declared that there was no evidence to support the involvement of the parents or the third-party expatriate in the disappearance. Consequently, the arguido status was lifted for all three individuals. Simultaneously, the Attorney General announced that the police investigation would be archived. This meant that, effectively, the active police work in Portugal was suspended until new, credible evidence emerged. For the family, this was a moment of mixed emotions. While they were legally cleared of suspicion, the archiving of the case meant that no police force was actively looking for the missing subject. The official search had stopped. To fill this void, the parents intensified their private efforts. They launched a global awareness campaign, ensuring that the image of the subject remained in the public consciousness. The campaign focused on her distinct physical features, particularly the unique mark on her right iris, hoping that this detail would trigger a memory in a witness somewhere in the world. This period, often referred to as the cold phase, was characterized by a deluge of information but a drought of truth. The global visibility of the case led to a phenomenon known as vision contamination. People all over the world began to report sightings of the missing individual. Reports flooded in from Morocco, Belgium, Spain, and even as far away as Australia and South America. Each sighting was a flicker of hope that had to be investigated. Private detectives hired by the family chased down these leads. In one instance, a blurry photograph taken by a tourist in North Africa appeared to show a young girl with a resemblance to the subject being carried on the back of a local woman. After intense analysis and international inquiries, the girl in the photo was identified as a local resident, unrelated to the case. This pattern repeated itself dozens of times. Well-meaning individuals, influenced by the saturation of media coverage, saw the missing subject in the faces of countless unconnected individuals. For years, the case remained in this limbo. It was a mystery fueled by speculation rather than science. The narrative became a cycle of false leads and disappointments. The files sat gathering dust in a Portuguese archive, while the parents continued their advocacy, stating they would never stop looking until they had a definitive answer. The silence from the authorities was deafening, but the noise from the public and the press ensured that the name of the missing subject was never forgotten. The case had gone cold, but it was about to be reignited by a review that would expose the flaws of the past and point toward a darker future. By the year 2011, the silence surrounding the case had become a source of national frustration in the United Kingdom. The Portuguese investigation had been officially closed for years, leaving the files gathering dust in an archive, while the family continued their private search without the power of state authority. The lack of resolution was not merely a personal tragedy. It had evolved into a matter of public interest that reached the highest levels of the British government. Following a direct appeal from the parents to the Prime Minister and the Home Secretary, a decision was made to leverage the resources of the Metropolitan Police. This marked the inception of Operation Grange, a specialized task force designed to conduct a forensic review of the entire case from the very beginning. The mandate was clear. This was to be a zero-based inquiry, meaning investigators would ignore all previous conclusions and examine every piece of information as if it were fresh. The scale of this operation was unprecedented. A dedicated team of detectives and civilian analysts was assembled in London. Their first task was not to hunt for a suspect, but to organize the chaos of information. Over the previous 4 years, the case had generated a mountain of data. Tens of thousands of documents, witness statements, emails, and tip-offs from across the globe. Much of this information was in Portuguese, requiring translation and synthesis into a single, searchable database. The financial commitment was significant. The operation would eventually cost millions of pounds, funded by the Home Office. This expenditure drew criticism from some quarters, but the authorities maintained that the unique nature of the vanishing justified the resource allocation. The investigators utilized advanced software to cross-reference telephone numbers, license plates, and names that had appeared in the periphery of the original inquiry but had never been fully investigated. As the team combed through the data, they identified significant gaps in the initial timeline. The review highlighted that the window of opportunity for the taking was much narrower than previously thought. The analysis of the checks performed by the parents and their friends on the night of the incident suggested that the person responsible had to act with extreme speed and precision. This led the detectives to hypothesize that the incident was likely a planned act by an individual with local knowledge rather than a random, opportunistic event. One of the key achievements of Operation Grange in this phase was the elimination of red herrings. For years, the public perception of the case had been clouded by the sketch of a suspect seen carrying a child near the resort. The British detectives tracked down the man who had been the basis for this sketch. He was identified as a British tourist who had been carrying his own family member home from the night care facility. With this sighting explained and dismissed, the timeline shifted. The focus returned to the sighting described by Jane Tanner, the shadow in the night, carrying a child away from the apartment complex. The tone of the investigation changed from a passive review to an active pursuit. The detectives identified a new set of potential persons of interest. They discovered a pattern of burglaries in the area leading up to the disappearance, incidents that had been overlooked by the original inquiry. The theory of a burglary gone wrong gained traction. The hypothesis suggested that an intruder may have entered the apartment with the intent to steal, only to be disturbed by the waking child, resulting in a panic-induced taking. Operation Grange also re-examined the cell phone data from Praia da Luz. They analyzed the traffic of mobile devices that were active near the Ocean Club on the night of the incident. This digital forensic work would eventually plant the seeds for the major breakthrough that would arrive years later. By the time the review transitioned into a full-scale criminal investigation, the British authorities had recorded hundreds of new leads and identified multiple individuals who required further questioning. The operation breathed new life into a cold case. It validated the parents' belief that the original investigation had been incomplete. While they still did not have the answer to the ultimate question where the daughter was, they now had the full weight of Scotland Yard dismantling the mystery piece by piece. The investigation had moved from a state of paralysis to one of methodical, forensic action, setting the stage for the identification of a suspect who had been hiding in plain sight. In June of the year 2020, the narrative of the disappearance underwent a seismic shift. For 13 years, the investigation had been characterized by false dawns and theories that dissolved under scrutiny. However, a press conference held in the city of Braunschweig, Germany, would deliver the most significant development since the initial timeline was established. The German Federal Criminal Police Office, in coordination with the prosecutor, Hans Christian Wolters, made a formal announcement that reverberated across the globe. They declared that they were investigating a 43-year-old German national in connection with the vanishing of the young subject from the Ocean Club. For legal reasons mandated by German privacy laws, the suspect was identified only as Christian B. This was not a theoretical suspect based on a sketch or a fleeting witness account. Christian B was a tangible figure, an individual already known to the judicial system. At the time of the announcement, he was incarcerated in a German prison, serving a sentence for drug trafficking and other serious offenses. The authorities revealed that this individual had lived a transient lifestyle in the Algarve region of Portugal, between the years 1995 and 2007. The timeline of his residence was critical. Investigators established that Christian B. had been living in a farmhouse just a few miles from the resort town of Praia da Luz. Furthermore, he was known to frequent the area with a distinctive Volkswagen camper van, a vehicle that allowed him to move unnoticed and live off the grid. The proximity of his residence to the location of the incident placed him geographically at the center of the mystery. What made Christian B. a credible suspect in the eyes of the investigators was his specific criminal history. While the public briefing was careful to avoid graphic details, it was disclosed that the suspect had a record involving burglary in holiday resorts and offenses against the integrity of others. This profile aligned with one of the earliest theories of the case, that the perpetrator may have been a local thief who was disturbed during a break-in, leading to a fatal escalation. However, the announcement brought with it a somber reality. Unlike the British police, who continued to treat the case as a missing person inquiry, the German prosecutors were operating under a darker assumption. They stated publicly that they believed the missing subject had suffered a tragic loss and was no longer alive. They classified the investigation as a homicide inquiry, despite the absence of a lifeless form. This divergence in classification created a complex emotional landscape for the parents. On one hand, the identification of a prime suspect offered the first real possibility of justice in over a decade. On the other hand, the German authorities' assertion that the outcome was fatal without providing the physical proof to the family was a devastating blow to the lingering hope of a reunion. The investigation into Christian B. was described as intricate. The police appealed to the public for information regarding two specific vehicles linked to the suspect, the camper van and a Jaguar car. They also requested information regarding a specific mobile phone number. The authorities believed that deciphering the movements of this individual and his digital footprint would finally complete the puzzle that had baffled the world for 13 years. The focus had shifted entirely. The question was no longer who might be responsible, but rather how the suspect had evaded detection for so long while hiding in plain sight. To fully comprehend why German investigators are so steadfast in their conviction regarding the suspect, one must delve deeply into the fragmented and chaotic history of the individual identified only as Christian B. He was not merely a transient tourist passing through the region for a brief holiday. Rather, he was a long-term resident of the Algarve, embedding himself into the fringe of the expatriate community for several years. His lifestyle was characterized by a distinct lack of permanence, oscillating between living in a dilapidated farmhouse located approximately 1 mile from the resort and residing within a distinctive Volkswagen camper van. This vehicle was not just a mode of transport, but a mobile base of operations that allowed him to navigate the coastal towns with anonymity, blending into the landscape of surfers and travelers while masking a far more calculated criminal intent. His existence was funded not through legitimate employment, but through a series of illicit activities that ranged from drug trafficking to the theft of fuel and diesel, establishing a pattern of antisocial behavior that escalated over time without drawing significant attention from the major law enforcement agencies. The criminal profile of Christian B. is that of an opportunistic offender who possessed an intimate knowledge of the local geography and the habits of the tourists who frequented the area. According to the analysis provided by crime intelligence experts, he demonstrated a specific predilection for targeting holiday accommodations, likely driven by the knowledge that vacationers often left valuables, cash, and passports unattended in their apartments while dining or swimming. This background supports the prevailing theory held by the prosecutors, that the incident on the night of May the 3rd may have begun as a routine burglary. The hypothesis suggests that the suspect may have entered the ground floor apartment through the unlocked window or patio doors with the primary intention of acquiring material goods to finance his lifestyle. In this version of events, the discovery of the young subject within the room was not the initial objective, but an unexpected complication that led to a spontaneous and catastrophic decision to remove the individual from the premises to eliminate a witness or to fulfill a darker, secondary compulsion. Psychological evaluations and profiles constructed from his previous interactions with the judicial system paint a disturbing picture of an individual who lacks empathy and exhibits the classic traits of a high-risk offender. Authorities have noted that, throughout his history, he has shown a remarkable ability to compartmentalize his life, maintaining a facade of normalcy while engaging in severe offenses against the integrity of vulnerable individuals. His past convictions in Germany, which include attacks on the bodily autonomy of others, reveal a pattern of behavior that targets those who cannot defend themselves. Despite this troubling history, he managed to slip through the cracks of the European justice system for decades, moving between countries to avoid the consequences of his actions. This ability to evade detection, combined with his reported tendency to discuss his deviant behavioral patterns in online chat rooms and with associates while under the influence of intoxicants, suggests a personality that is both arrogant and reckless, yet calculated enough to dispose of evidence when the situation demands it. The investigation into his background also revealed that during his time in Praia da Luz, he was not entirely invisible. He was a known figure in certain circles, yet he managed to keep the darkest aspects of his character hidden from the general public. He worked sporadic jobs in the catering and restaurant sectors, which gave him further access to the routines of tourists and the layout of various resorts. The synthesis of this information leads investigators to believe that he was uniquely positioned to commit the act. He had the local knowledge to navigate the streets in the dark, the criminal experience to enter a secure location without forcing a door, and the vehicle necessary to transport a subject away from the scene rapidly. The profile is not that of a sophisticated international mastermind, but of a driftless and dangerous individual whose path tragically intersected with that of the family on that fateful evening, turning a crime of property into a mystery of human loss. The investigation into the suspect identified as Christian B. reached a pivotal juncture when detectives turned their attention away from physical witness sightings and focused entirely on the immutable record of digital telecommunications. In the modern era of criminal forensics, the movement of a mobile device often provides a more reliable narrative than human memory, which can fade or become distorted over time. The German authorities, working in close collaboration with Portuguese telecommunication providers, managed to retrieve archived data records that dated back to the night of the incident in May of 2007. This retrieval process was complex, requiring the reconstruction of cell tower handshakes from a network infrastructure that had been significantly upgraded and altered in the intervening decade. The analysis centered on a specific mobile phone number that investigators had definitively linked to the suspect during his residency in the Algarve region. The objective was to determine the precise geolocation of this device during the critical window of the disappearance, specifically the hour leading up to the moment the mother discovered the empty bed. The breakthrough came when the technical analysis confirmed that the mobile device attributed to Christian B. had connected to a cell tower mast located in Praia da Luz on the evening of May the 3rd. The data indicated that the phone was not merely in the general vicinity of the town, but was registered within the specific sector that provided coverage to the Ocean Club resort. According to the logs, the device received a telephone call at approximately 7:30 in the evening and maintained a connection to the network for 30 minutes, terminating the signal just an hour before the alarm was raised regarding the missing daughter. This digital footprint placed the suspect geographically at the scene of the crime during the exact time frame that the parents were dining at the tapas restaurant and the young individuals were asleep in the apartment. For the prosecution, this was the smoking gun that moved the case from theoretical suspicion to material probability, as it contradicted any potential claim that the suspect was miles away at his farmhouse or traveling in his camper van at the time of the incident. However, the digital trail revealed more than just a location. It exposed a pattern of behavior that investigators interpreted as a consciousness of guilt or a preparation for flight. In the immediate aftermath of the disappearance, while the local police and the family were frantically searching the coastline and the resort grounds, the suspect appears to have engaged in a bureaucratic maneuver designed to distance himself from his physical property. Records obtained from the German Transport Authority revealed that on the day following the vanishing, Christian B. re-registered his Jaguar vehicle into the name of an acquaintance. This administrative action, executed less than 24 hours after the global media began to descend on Praia da Luz, raised immediate red flags for the cold case team. The timing suggested an urgent desire to sever ties with a vehicle that could potentially contain forensic evidence or be recognized by witnesses near the apartment complex. Furthermore, the investigation into the mobile phone data opened a new avenue of inquiry regarding the second party involved in that 30-minute conversation. The person who dialed the suspect's number on the night of the incident remains one of the most significant unidentified figures in the entire case. The German prosecutor publicly appealed for information regarding this unknown caller, stating that this individual is a key witness who could either provide the suspect with an alibi or confirm his presence and demeanor mere moments before the alleged abduction took place. The inability to identify this caller remains a source of frustration, as the prepaid nature of the SIM cards used in that era often allowed for complete anonymity. Nevertheless, the combination of the cell tower ping placing him at the resort and the suspicious transfer of vehicle ownership the very next day created a compelling circumstantial lattice, tightening the net around a man who had successfully lived in the shadows for 13 years. The investigation into the background of Christian B. eventually led German authorities away from the sunny coast of Portugal to a desolate and overgrown property in the state of Saxony-Anhalt, specifically in the village of Neuwegersleben. In the year 2016, law enforcement executed a massive search warrant on a dilapidated industrial site, often referred to in police files as the factory. This location, which the suspect had utilized as a residence and a storage facility during periods when he was not traveling, was a chaotic labyrinth of debris, discarded vehicles, and structural decay. The raid was not initially connected to the disappearance in Praia da Luz, but was part of a broader inquiry into the suspect's erratic behavior and other unrelated legal infractions. However, the meticulous nature of the search, which involved the deployment of heavy excavation machinery and specialized canine units trained to detect digital storage devices, would unearth a cache of evidence that provided a chilling insight into the private world of the suspect. The search teams focused their attention on a specific area of the grounds where the earth appeared to have been disturbed and subsequently resettled. Upon excavation, investigators discovered the skeletal remains of a domestic animal, a dog that had belonged to the suspect and had been buried at the site. It was what lay beneath these animal remains that transformed the trajectory of the investigation. Buried deeper in the soil, hidden directly under the carcass in a deliberate attempt to deter curiosity or digging, was a plastic bag containing multiple USB flash drives and hard drives. This method of concealment, using the body of a pet as a shield for incriminating material, suggested a high degree of calculated forethought. It implied that the suspect believed no investigator would disturb the resting place of a companion animal, revealing a psychological strategy designed to protect his most guarded secrets. When forensic computer analysts later decrypted and examined the contents of these drives, they found a staggering volume of data. The storage devices contained thousands of image and video files. While the specifics of these images are sealed in court documents and are too sensitive for public description, prosecutors have confirmed that they depicted severe criminal offenses against vulnerable individuals. The material was not merely a collection of downloaded content. Some of the files were seemingly self-recorded, documenting the suspect's own actions over a period spanning several years. This discovery was pivotal because it established that Christian B. was not merely a thief or a drug trafficker, but an individual with a deep-seated and documented interest in exploiting those who could not defend themselves. The sheer volume of the digital trophies painted a portrait of an offender who was escalating his behavior and who derived satisfaction from reliving his past actions through these recordings. The discovery at the factory provided the German prosecutors with the leverage they needed. Although the drives did not contain direct images of the missing subject from the Ocean Club, they firmly established the suspect's profile as a dangerous habitual offender. This evidence allowed the authorities to keep Christian B. in custody for other crimes, while they continued to build the complex circumstantial case regarding the disappearance in Portugal. The buried secrets proved that the suspect led a double life. One as a drifter living in a camper van on the fringes of society, and another as a methodical collector of illicit material who went to extraordinary lengths to preserve the record of his offenses. For the investigators, the factory was a site of significant forensic interest that, while miles away from the crime scene, offered the clearest window yet into the mind of the man they believed was responsible for the silent vanishing. While the geolocation data successfully placed the suspect, Christian B., in the immediate vicinity of the Ocean Club on the night of the incident, investigators were left grappling with a significant void in the timeline. The identity of the person with whom he was communicating. Forensic analysis of the telecommunication logs revealed that at approximately 7:30 in the evening, just 1 hour before the parents began their dinner routine at the tapas restaurant, the suspect received a telephone call. This telephonic exchange was not a brief or inconsequential interaction. The records indicate that the connection was maintained for roughly 30 minutes. This duration suggests a substantive conversation, rather than a wrong number or a fleeting check-in. The critical nature of this evidence cannot be overstated, as this specific window of time aligns perfectly with the period immediately preceding the reported disappearance of the young subject. The person on the other end of that line is, therefore, the most vital missing witness in the entire investigation, possessing the potential to definitively confirm the suspect's demeanor, location, and mindset mere moments before the alleged crime occurred. The challenge facing the German federal investigators lies in the technological anonymity that characterized mobile communication during the mid-2000s. The number that dialed Christian B. belonged to a prepaid mobile service, a common method of communication in Portugal at the time that required no formal registration or identification documents to purchase. Consequently, while the digital footprint of the call exists in the archives of the network provider, the human identity associated with the SIM card remains a ghost. This individual could be anyone: a former romantic partner, a criminal associate involved in the burglary ring, or a completely innocent acquaintance discussing mundane matters. However, despite years of public appeals and the dissemination of the specific phone number involved to the global press, no individual has come forward to claim ownership of that conversation. This silence has fueled intense speculation within the forensic community that the caller may have reasons to fear implication in the events of that night, or perhaps they fear the suspect himself. The authorities view this unknown caller as the key that could unlock the entire case. Prosecutor Hans Christian Wolters has publicly stated that identifying this person is a top priority for the investigation. If found, this witness could dismantle any potential alibi the suspect might construct. For instance, if the conversation involved discussions about the layout of the resort or the presence of the family, it would elevate the charge from circumstantial suspicion to premeditated intent. Conversely, if the witness can prove that the suspect was engaged in a completely unrelated activity or was in a location that the cell tower data misinterpreted, though experts deem this unlikely, it could exonerate him. The persistence of the investigation into this single phone call highlights the fragility of modern forensic cases. Despite having satellite data and hard drives full of incriminating material, the resolution of the mystery ultimately hinges on a human element that refuses to surface. As the years continue to pass, the pressure to identify the unknown caller intensifies. The investigators are operating against the clock, aware that memories fade and witnesses disappear. The theory suggests that the suspect, known for his manipulative behavior and ability to intimidate those in his circle, may have ensured the silence of this individual long ago. Until this ghost is given a name and a face, the 30-minute conversation remains a black hole in the narrative, a silent testament to the secrets that were exchanged in the shadow of the Ocean Club on the night the young daughter was taken. The investigation remains suspended in this state of anticipation, waiting for the one person who knows the truth of that evening to finally break their silence. The public narrative of this investigation is currently dominated by the resolute and often controversial position of the German prosecutor, Hans Christian Wolters, who has become the face of the inquiry in the years following the identification of the new suspect. Wolters has taken a stance that is unusual in the realm of criminal jurisprudence. He has publicly declared on multiple occasions that his office is 100% convinced that Christian B. is the individual responsible for the disappearance of the young subject from the Ocean Club. However, this absolute certainty is juxtaposed against a frustrating legal reality. The prosecutor admits that while they possess what they describe as concrete evidence of the suspect's involvement, they currently lack the forensic smoking gun necessary to secure a conviction in a court of law. This distinction between knowing the truth and proving the truth has created a tense standoff between the authorities and the public. Wolters suggests that the evidence they hold, likely a combination of the digital footprint, the geolocation data, and the disturbing materials found in the suspect's possession, forms a circumstantial lattice that allows for no other logical conclusion, yet it falls just short of the threshold required to charge the suspect with ending a life without the recovery of a lifeless form. The most harrowing aspect of the prosecutor's position is the grim assumption under which the German authorities are operating. Unlike the British police, who for many years maintained the status of the investigation as a missing person case, the German team has classified the inquiry as a murder investigation. Wolters has stated that the prosecution has no reason to believe the young daughter is still alive. This conclusion is reportedly based on specific evidence that has not been shared with the public to protect the integrity of the ongoing investigation. The theory suggests that the authorities may possess digital or physical proof that implies a fatal outcome, even if the biological remains have never been located. This position has placed the prosecutor in a deeply difficult ethical conflict regarding the family of the missing subject. He has communicated to them that the missing individual has suffered a tragic loss, yet he has refused to reveal the specific details of how or why he knows this, citing the risk that revealing such information could tip off the suspect or his associates, thereby jeopardizing the chance of a final legal resolution. The legal strategy employed by the prosecutor's office is one of calculated patience and psychological pressure. In the German legal system, once a suspect is charged and arguably acquitted due to a lack of evidence, they cannot be tried again for the same crime, a principle known as double jeopardy. Therefore, Wolters is acutely aware that he has only one opportunity to bring this case to trial. If he moves too quickly, before the final piece of the puzzle is secured, he risks allowing a dangerous offender to walk free permanently regarding this specific case. Consequently, the public naming of Christian B. was likely a strategic maneuver designed to flush out witnesses. By broadcasting the suspect's name and images of his vehicles, the camper van and the Jaguar, the prosecution hoped to rattle former associates, encouraging someone who harbors a dark secret from 2007 to come forward. The theory is that the suspect, who has a history of bragging about his exploits while intoxicated, may have confessed his actions to a confidant who is now living in fear or carrying the burden of that knowledge. Ultimately, the prosecutor's stance represents a high-stakes gamble between justice and closure. Wolters is effectively holding the case open, waiting for a shift in the landscape, a confession, a discovery of biological traces, or the testimony of the unknown caller, while the suspect remains incarcerated for other offenses. This approach has drawn criticism from those who demand immediate action, but the prosecutor maintains that building a watertight case takes precedence over speed. The investigation is currently in a state of suspended animation, where the authorities are confident they have identified the offender who took the young individual, but are forced to wait for the scientific or human error that will finally allow them to close the steel door of the courtroom behind him. As the timeline of this investigation extends beyond a decade and a half, the disappearance of the young subject from Praia da Luz remains one of the most perplexing forensic anomalies in modern criminal history. The case has evolved from a frantic local search into a sprawling international inquiry that spans multiple continents and involves the dedicated resources of 3 separate national police forces. Despite the identification of a prime suspect and the accumulation of vast amounts of circumstantial data, the central question of the location of the missing individual remains unanswered. The investigation currently exists in a state of paradoxical limbo. The German authorities are professionally convinced that the mystery is resolved in terms of the perpetrator's identity, yet they are legally paralyzed by the absence of the ultimate physical proof required to close the file. This stalemate has created a unique judicial environment where a man is publicly accused by a state prosecutor of the most grievous act. Yet he remains uncharged for this specific incident, protected by the rigorous standards of evidence that demand more than just a strong theory or a history of prior offenses. The divergent approaches of the involved agencies highlight the complexity of the case. While the German Federal Criminal Police Office operates under the grim assumption that the outcome was fatal, the Metropolitan Police in the United Kingdom continue to classify the investigation as a missing person inquiry. This distinction is not merely semantic. It dictates the allocation of resources and the nature of the hope maintained by the family. For the parents, this difference in classification is a lifeline, however slender, that supports their enduring campaign to find answers. They have lived for years in the agonizing space between the prosecutor's certainty of a tragic loss and the lack of a lifeless form to confirm it. This forensic ambiguity allows for the persistence of conflicting narratives. One where the subject was the victim of a calculated criminal act by the suspect known as Christian B., and another where the truth lies in a completely different direction that has yet to be illuminated by the evidence. The enduring mystery of the case is often attributed to the concept of the perfect crime, not because of the genius of the perpetrator, but due to a tragedy of errors in the initial response. Forensic experts argue that the golden hour, the period immediately following the report of the disappearance, was compromised by the contamination of the scene and the delay in securing the border and local roadways. This initial chaotic phase allowed the person responsible to slip through the net, creating a forensic void that sophisticated technology and millions of pounds in funding have struggled to fill years later. The investigation has dismantled countless false leads. From the sighting of the man carrying a child to the reports of lookalikes in foreign countries, leaving the authorities with a stripped-back timeline that points ominously to the activities near the Ocean Club on that specific evening in May of 2007. Ultimately, the story of this vanishing is a narrative of silence. It is the silence of the witness who called the suspect's phone and has never come forward. The silence of the associates who may know the secrets of the factory in Germany. And the silence of the physical landscape in Portugal, which has yielded no trace of the missing subject. As the operation winds down and the funding is debated in government halls, the case stands as a testament to the limitations of justice. The puzzle is nearly complete, with the timeline established and the suspect identified. But the final piece, the recovery of the young subject, remains elusive. Until that silence is broken, the disappearance remains an open wound. A forensic case study of how a life can vanish into the night, leaving behind only questions that echo through the years without resolution.